Hey everybody, it's hwsteele. Today is January 12th, 2021, and this video is going to be for the second week in January here, 2021. This video is basically going to be an update on the Amazon forecast that I did all last year, and I'm just going to update it here, look over what happened in the last, look over what happened in the forecast from the last video, and then push the forecast forward a month and a half or so. So let's go ahead and get to that, shall we? So this is the Amazon.com stock daily, and these squiggly lines right here are the forecasted lines from the previous video, which was done early, let me move this up here so you can see it better, early November of last year. So remember that this forecast is produced simply by pushing the next pivot 7 calendar days into the future. So we had a low right here, and then we were expecting a high right here, which came in, the high really came in one day over here, theoretically. And then we were expecting a low over here, which that worked out okay. Even this high point right here is lower than this top of this bar right there, so that's theoretically acceptable. But then we're we're expecting a high right here, and we don't get it, so we have to either push this day forward one, and then we're just ever so slightly higher, or we can pull this back one and push it forward one to make it a little bit, in quotes, cleaner. So that's acceptable, but we're really starting to rack up the pushes and pulls here. And then we have a low that we're expecting that's right here. So that's going to have to be pulled back right here, with this one having been pushed forward right here, and then just getting that little move there. And it's just kind of getting messed up here. It's, in quotes, acceptable and doable, but every single swing is needing to be adjusted a little bit. We expect a high over here after this low, and that it's harder. We expect a low over here, which is about the same as that. So going right here, expecting the high, again, it's like we're out of phase is what it really looks like. Everything's having to be adjusted. We could make it work by adjusting every single swing, or we could invert. Consider that this pivot right here produced an inversion, and then all of a sudden everything lines up pretty nicely. So if we look at it right here, if this is an inversion right here, that means all of the forecast pivots would be the opposite of what they were forecasted as. Every high would really be a low, and every low would really be a high. And when we consider it that way, this would be a low, and that matches beautifully. This would be a high, and that matches beautifully. This would be a low, and again, a beautiful match. This would be a high, once again, matches very well. This would be a low, and it matches decently. It's definitely lower than over here. And this would be a high, which matches very closely. If we push this one forward one day, then this high right here is definitely higher than this low over here. This would be a low, and as long as we push that one forward, that works with this being a low. And then this last pivot that I had right here from the last video would now be a high, and it matches the high of the market right there. So it's saying that there was an inversion right here is, in my opinion, the best thing to do at this point. So with that in mind, everything after this is part of this video's forecast. Now, I'm a little bit late to this video, so there's a couple of these swings that have already come in, but we're going to get at least a half dozen swings into the future. So if you look at this part was not corrected for the inversion, but I used this horizontal line to correct this future forecast that I'm doing right now for the inversion. So I'm expecting a low for right here, or was expecting, and then expecting a high for right here. And as of right now, it doesn't match up perfectly, but we can see what the price action is for tomorrow, and perhaps the market will go higher, and then everything would work with a push or a pull in one direction or the other. But anyway, actually going into the future now, the low is forecasted for January 19, the high is forecasted for January 26, The next low is forecasted for February 2nd. The next high is forecasted for February 9, and then the low February 16, high February 23, and then the final pivot of this forecast would be on yellow. There we go, March 2nd. So then the question comes into play, what causes the inversion? What would be the cause of the inversion? And there's actually different causes for inversions. It depends on how you make forecasts. Like for instance, this right here is a static cycle being pushed into the future. In other words, that 7 days that I'm using, it never changes. And eventually, let's say the underlying cycle in the Amazon stock is really like 6.9 days, or maybe it's 7.2 days, something like that. So in other words, it's a little bit off of that exact 7-day period. And as a result, over time, the actual cycle in the market will come out of phase from the forecasted pivots. And if that happens in a high volatility period of time, you're going to get an inversion. If it happens in a low volatility period of time, like over here, then you can explain away there's actually an inversion in there, but you can explain it away because price action is so close to each other. There's so much repetitive price action in a consolidated area like that when compared to a big momentous move like that, like this one right here. So in other words, statistically speaking, because there's so much overlap in price right here, there could be inversions right here or right here, and you might not notice them, might not see them at all. And then the market comes back into phase and everything works decently. So when you have a high volatility point in time like this, it's hard to hide the inversion. There's also the possibility that there's two cycles working that are very close to each other. You might have like a 7-day cycle and an 8-day cycle, something along those lines. Or it might be a harmonic of 7, like a 7-day cycle and a 15-day cycle, or a 22-day cycle, something along those lines. And as a result, those cycles come out of phase a little bit, and that would actually be a better explanation for what's going on here, simply because the amplitude of this move was so much greater than the average amplitude that we see with this theoretical 7-day cycle here. It's also possible that you have a cycle in a completely different dimension causing a problem. And I know that sounds funny, or ridiculous is actually the word to use, but there's some forecasting methodologies where that's literally the explanation when you produce these high-low forecasts, that there is a cycle from another dimension that produces your inversions for you. In other words, they just kind of show up out of nowhere, kind of. Not exactly, but kind of. But anyway, so we're going to call this an inversion right here. And that fixes this forecast so that it works according to the market much better. And we'll see how well it does with this if it stays inverted. Because if it's actually two close cycles, or the harmonics that are close, for instance, the 7-day, maybe the 22-day cycle, the areas where you would expect an inversion to actually happen that would be noticeable, there would be a couple of them close together, and then it would take a while for that to sync back up where those inversions that might be noticeable would happen again. So long story short, which I'm sure 98% of you have already turned off this video, but long story short, inversions happen in the markets way more than you think that they do. It's just that because so much of the market is repetitive price action or consolidation, it's kind of easy to hide them. So think about that for a while. Or maybe I shouldn't say it's easy to hide them. I should say it's hard to find them, harder to find them. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and end the video here, and I will talk to you next week. I hope you guys all have a wonderful rest of the week and a great weekend, and I guess a great first part of next week.